Let's talk to Robin Aitken, though, former BBC journalist, author of Can We Trust the BBC and The Nobel Liar. Robin, a very good morning to you.
Morning to you, Mike.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We've actually got some questions for the BBC, and I'm going to put them to you, if I may, shortly before I ask you to answer them. I'm just going to run through them. We've got 5 questions for the BBC. 1. Who at the BBC knew or was made aware that Huw Edwards had been arrested in November? 2. Did those individuals raise this to the Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee within the BBC? 3. Did the Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee discuss Huw Edwards' arrest for serious offences? 4. Was BBC management consciously aware it was still paying Huw Edwards' 6-figure salary with licence fee payers' money after his arrest in November? And 5. Were any attempts made by management to terminate Huw Edwards' contract and salary following knowledge of the arrest in November? I don't know where to begin really here, but it would seem that those are all pretty valid questions. I'm assuming that Lisa Nandy might ask those questions to Tim Davie when she sees him today. But it's quite a remarkable state of affairs, isn't it?
It is, and those are very good questions. The thing is, I suppose, and I'm not an employment lawyer, obviously, but I would think, Mike, that although I think BBC has questions to answer, and maybe there has been incompetence in BBC management, I also think that probably the employment contract of someone like Huw Edwards would have been pretty watertight. And we do have to, we have to say, don't we? And you and I, I'm sure, would agree that innocent until proven guilty is the proper course of procedure with anyone who's accused of anything. So it's this is a very complex area actually, because the BBC, I suppose, and I'm only guessing here, but I imagine they couldn't sack him on the basis even of his being charged, because he was not at that point a guilty man.
Right.
I do think that the question of his payment should have been better handled.
Yeah.
I think it would have been much better if the BBC had said, for instance, look, we'll suspend your payment at this point. If you're proven if you're proven innocent, fine,
Yeah.
you can get the money back. There was clearly never any question, I think, of his reappearing on the BBC screens, because even the information that we had, the original Sun story about the young man that Edwards was paying to present indecent pictures of himself, that was enough to disqualify him from the role he was doing.
Yes.
I do think...
Although, interestingly enough, there were a lot of people at the time who hate the Sun so much that they said, this is an awful invasion of privacy, let him do what he wants in his own time. I mean, that part of it I found extraordinary.
Absolutely. I mean, those people at Hacked Off, who actually, although they present themselves as sort of warriors for truth, and they perceive the tabloid press as the enemy, would any of this have come to light at all had it not been for the Sun's intervention?
Right.
I don't think, and there's a very serious point here about press freedom. I think that this government, one of the dangers of this new Labour government, one thing I fear about it, is that there will be regulations brought in which will hamper the press further. And I think we should all be very worried about the idea of licensing newspapers,
Yes.
which is a real possibility because of that hangover from the Leveson inquiry and the recommendations which were never enacted. I do think that's a very serious point. But I would like to think those people who are the celebrity supporters of Hacked Off would be examining their consciences, let's say, this morning, and perhaps eating a bit of humble pie.
Yes.
About their attitude when Edwards was first unmasked.
Right. Well, even their attitude before he was first unmasked, because the Sun, I think quite reasonably, didn't name him in that first sort of expose, which the headline said top BBC star in sex pics probe. a lot of people at the time said, you know, oh, this is all terribly irresponsible because now you're putting people in the frame, you know, who might not be in the frame, and certain people started being accused of things. But the point is that, you know, the Sun was at great pains to do it the right way. And it seemed whichever way they did it, they were getting criticised for it.
Don't you think, Mike? I mean, when people talk disparagingly about the tabloid press, and the press in general, in fact, I know, as I'm sure you know, because of your background, you know how punctilious and careful newspapers are before they print anything, because you simply cannot be, you can't be reckless about putting things into print. And actually, you know, the record of the tabloids in uncovering wrongdoing in this country is exemplary, actually. And anything which hobbles or hampers that work will be to our general detriment. I just say at this, you know, at that point when the Sun had said top BBC star, I remember sitting around, we were having just a family meal, and the conversation turned to who could it possibly be at the BBC? And I jokingly said, as a joke, I said, because I thought, who is the least likely person to be this top BBC star?
Right.
And I said, you know, Huw Edwards, jokingly.
Right.
And subsequently, I think what that brought home to me now is just what a serious matter this is for the BBC.
Yeah.
Do you know that the role of the BBC's senior news journalist, the one who is given all the cherries on top of the cake, all the big state occasions, that is a role, it's never advertised, it doesn't have a name. People say the voice of the nation. This is a job which, the essence of which is trust. Yeah. And it's trust from the BBC in the individual. Edwards was groomed for that job over a period of decades till he was elevated to it. They were investing all the organization's credibility and trust in that individual. And we, the audience, of course, respond to that, and we trusted him too. That is why this episode is so very serious for the BBC.
Of course. And there's a fascinating piece in the Times today written by Andrew Billen, who I know a little bit, who spent a few lunches with Huw Edwards over the course of years, and gave a very interesting insight into the man's character. And you would think that the BBC bods and the management would know this, but that he was quite sort of he was quite eccentric off air. He was quite funny. He was quite cutting of his colleagues. He was quite sort of waspish. You know, not at all the figure that you saw on TV. And I mean, of course, that's not unusual. But you would imagine that it was very clear to Andrew Billen that there was quite a lot more to Huw Edwards than the sort of, you know, the very straight-laced image that he gave out when he was on the air.
Yeah. And, you know, this does remind us all, I suppose, of the other great BBC sex scandal, which was Jimmy Savile. You know, the point is, Mike, that within the BBC there is a star system, and if you're on that star track, if you become the big star, then the organisation becomes very defensive of you, it protects you. And it's very, very difficult, I might say, within the organisation to point the finger at someone who's been singled out as being the star. I think there are serious questions, actually, for his line managers over the years to answer, because there have been complaints. In fact, in the wake of the Sun's story, there were complaints from individuals who'd been working on the 10 o'clock news with him about the way he had treated them. Right. So there were suggestions of bullying and bad behaviour in other respects. You know, did the BBC managers act on those? They clearly didn't. And it was the same, wasn't it, with, I mean, Savile is at a different level, let's be honest about what Edwards did. You know, and I, you know, Mike, you know, we live in a country which is saturated in pornography. Yeah. And, you know, what is required of men in our society is self-restraint, because at the click of a mouse, you can find material which is indecent and pornographic and illegal, and thousands of men, tens of thousands of men, I dare say,
That's true, yeah.
Had fallen victim to that temptation. Savile was a different matter. Savile was a sexual predator.
Yeah.
Of quite a different.
Oh, he was, absolutely. Listen, I'm sorry to cut you short, Robin. We must talk about this again, which we will, I'm sure, because we've got to run, because we're nearly out of time for the whole show. But thank you so much. Robin Aitken, former BBC journalist, author of Can We Trust the BBC?